Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Interesting People You've Never Heard of. Today's interesting person is Michael Fagan. At around 7 a.m. on the 9th of July 1982, Queen Elizabeth was asleep in the royal bedchamber at Buckingham Palace. She was awakened by a shaft of early morning light. As Her Majesty's eyes opened, she saw that a curtain had been drawn aside and the dawn light was streaming into the room. To her horror, she realized that there was a strange man standing in the middle of her bedroom. But who was this strange man and what did he want? Michael Fagan was born in Clerkenwell, London, to working class parents. By day, his father was a steel erector, but by night, his father pursued a life of crime as a champion safebreaker. Michael left home at a young age to escape his father, who was allegedly violent. He then left school with no qualifications and began working occasionally as a painter and decorator. However, as the recession of the early 1980s wore on, jobs became harder and harder to come by, and Fagan relied on government benefits, known here in the UK as the dole, to survive. He was married with 4 children, but the lack of income led to his wife leaving him for another man. After a violent confrontation between Fagan and his ex-wife's new partner, he was banned from seeing his own children. By all accounts, Michael Fagan was a devoted father in spite of his financial struggles, but losing access to his children, coupled with his continuing unemployment, sent him into a downward spiral. His mental health deteriorated and he began drinking heavily. In early June 1982, Fagan was walking home from the pub and happened to just pass by Buckingham Palace, as he often did. Seized by a sudden, inexplicable compulsion, he climbed over the security wall, shimmied up a drain pipe and crept into the palace through an unlocked window. He then proceeded to wander the corridors of the palace until he found a scullery where he downed a bottle of white wine before being discovered by a maid who raised the alarm. Her Majesty, of course, was informed about the break-in, but she declined the offer of increased security as she felt the security regime at Buckpal was too stringent already. This would turn out to be a fateful decision. A month later, at around 7 a.m. on the 9th of July 1982, Michael Fagan was walking home from a drinking binge and happened to be walking past Buckingham Palace again. Unsatisfied with his previous tour, he decided to repeat his little stunt. Showing a surprising degree of athleticism for a drunk, Fagan once again scaled Buckingham Palace's 14-foot high perimeter wall, which was topped with revolving spikes and barbed wire. He evaded the palace guards with the big hats, then shimmied up a drain pipe and climbed in through another unlocked window. He wandered the corridors of the palace, this time with a vague intention of meeting the Queen. He found his way to the royal apartments, in his words, by following the pictures. Presumably he meant the royal portraits. In an anteroom, Fagan actually broke a glass ashtray which cut his hand quite badly. He was still bleeding profusely and carrying a fragment of the glass when he entered the Queen's bedroom. According to Fagan himself, when he entered the Queen's bedroom, Her Majesty looked very small in her bed, which was, rather appropriately, queen-sized. He started opening the curtains, which awoke the sovereign. Startled, the Queen began to scream for help, but Fagan told her to stay quiet, and terrified, she obeyed. The Queen activated an emergency alarm, which was by her bedside, but the sound of the alarm was actually drowned out by a maid vacuuming. Realizing that help was not forthcoming, the Queen decided to stall the intruder. She asked him her usual question, "And what do you do?" To which Fagan responded by telling Her Majesty about his employment troubles, his personal woes, and his grudge against the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, who he largely blamed many of his problems on. The Queen listened very sympathetically, and she even offered him a glass of whiskey. Eventually, after what must have seemed an interminable length of time, a footman entered the room to bring Her Majesty her royal breakfast. Upon spotting the intruder, the footman of course raised the alarm, and very quickly 2 burly policemen dragged Fagan away, leaving the Queen shaken but unharmed. So, what happened to Michael Fagan? Was he thrown in the tower? Was he beheaded in front of a jeering mob? No. In fact, because trespassing at the time was a civil matter as opposed to a criminal one, he was not even charged with any crime. Fagan spent a mere 3 months in a psychiatric hospital and then was released back into society. There were unconfirmed reports that Her Majesty herself intervened to ensure that the poor man was not punished too severely, which is very gracious of her. After Fagan's 15 minutes of fame were over, he went on to live a relatively normal life. He recorded a version of the Sex Pistols song, but he changed the lyric to "God Save the Queen, she's a lovely human being." That's nice. He made a handful of sporadic television appearances throughout the years, once appearing on Antiques Roadshow of all things, but other than that, he lived a relatively quiet life on the same London council estate that he grew up on. The incident itself, however, while it may seem comical to us, it was quite a wake-up call for the royal family. It could have turned out to be a much darker story if, instead of a harmless drunk who, by all accounts, was a royalist who actually liked the Queen, the intruder could have been someone intent on harming Her Majesty. People found it unbelievable that one man could have successfully evaded detection, and the incident served to highlight the gaps in the palace's security. For example, the palace guards were not patrolling that section of wall. The CCTV cameras were actually unmanned at that time. The internal intruder alarm was activated, but it was just assumed to be a fault and ignored. The guard outside the Queen's bedroom door allegedly went outside for a cigarette. And finally, the Queen's personal alarm was drowned out by the sound of a vacuum cleaner. So after the incident, of course, security was radically increased. So now, if you are thinking of popping into Buckingham Palace to say hello, you'll need to either become a ninja or be nominated for a knighthood. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I will be back with another interesting person very soon. Thank you again and goodbye.